Hey YouTube, Katelyn here with Katelyn Inspires Personal Training. I'm here today to bring you some tips on hip mobility to help you get doing your leg workouts better and more effectively. But why would your hips be in jeopardy or causing you to have problems with flexibility or range of motion? Common dysfunction number 1, posterior weakness or weak glutes. The gluteus maximus is a primary mover of hip extension. Weak glutes mean weak extension. If this is you, then during the eccentric or the lowering phase of the squat, there's a good chance that you're going to start tipping forward. People talk a lot about core tightness and abdominal bracing as it relates to the forward lean, and that's absolutely valid, but it's also secondary. The first step to maintaining an upright torso is proper eccentric glute control. If you don't have the glute strength to maintain and drive hip extension, then your lower back will kick in to compensate, and guess what? It's not really suited for the task. So take a look at an anatomy chart and note the difference in size between your glutes and the musculature of your lower back. Which one would you prefer to carry the bulk of that 300 pounds you're trying to squat? If your butt's weak, your back's going to hurt, plain and simple. Of the various issues involved in poor squat technique, poor glute control is easily the largest factor. Movement dysfunction is a game of compensation. When you place a movement demand on your body, it's going to do its damnedest to perform. If it can't do something using the correct muscles, then it's going to start firing all sorts of funky stuff in a mad dash to satisfy your demands. Common dysfunction number 2, anterior tightness or tight flexors. In a general sense, most hip flexor tightness isn't the result of activity, but rather the unintended consequence of the passive positions we maintain throughout the day, when sitting comes to mind. While the squat can actually be a profoundly therapeutic exercise in terms of restoring proper gluteal activation and helping mobilize the front of the hips, when done incorrectly, it can do the exact opposite. It will reinforce the negative positions and dangerous compensation patterns. The primary movers in hip flexion are the rectus femoris, sartorius, along with the ellipsosus. There are a few smaller muscles that also play a role, but typically when you have tight or inflamed hip flexors, it's due to a dysfunction of one or more of these aforementioned muscles. When your flexors are tight, you will have a tendency to lean forward while squatting, and a forward lean will shift your center of gravity anteriorly and increase activation of your quadriceps while decreasing activation of your glutes. So in addition, once you're in the bottom position and your hip flexors have turned on, your body is going to want to use your quads to extend your knees, and guess what? 2 of the 3 main hip flexors are attached to your quadriceps, which are now firing. So as a result, when you stand up, your flexors are going to stay shortened, which will contribute to an anterior pelvic tilt and make it really difficult to adequately activate the posterior hip muscle. So another issue with tight hip flexors is that they are usually an indication of missing hip flexion or lacking hip mobility. And as I said before, frequently, your flexors will turn on as a way of pulling you down into a deeper flexion, but they really shouldn't have to. So ideally, you should have enough passive flexion to achieve the proper depth without the help of your hip flexors. And tight hip flexors can be both a red flag for missing flexion and a secondary cause for missing flexion. Your body's kind of weird like that.
Okay.
In order to get in a good leg workout, you have to get into the range of motion required by the exercises you're doing. Whether you're doing squats and you have to get down parallel, or if you're doing lunges and your trunk has to be upright, while you get full mobility through your hips, you don't want to be restricted because you need to prepare your body to do that kind of stuff. I have some drills I want to show you today to help you with your hip mobility and range of motion. For the first drill, set a bar or object hip height. This exercise is called hurdle under. Stand up beside the bar and go down, getting a nice groin stretch on your left thigh. Then you sink under the bar as you're into a semi-squat position. This allows a good stretch throughout the hips. Then, slowly come up to the other side as you stretch out your right thigh and repeat this several times until you feel like your hips may be more open. But what if you don't have a bar or anything to hurdle under? Try a foam roller or a little brother that can sit down low for a minute. Position yourself until your head and eyes are directly in front of the object. Same concept, sink down and get a nice stretch on each thigh. For the second drill, this is called the hurdle over. To work another aspect of this for dynamic flexibility of the hamstrings, use an object once again, for example, a foam roller, or a chair, and hurdle over. To demonstrate, kick out and over the object while stretching out each leg to improve mobility of your hips. This will give you a nice circular motion in your hips as well, and try to do this without kicking the object over. And for the third drill, it's called quadruped rocking with active shoulder flexion. First, get on all fours. Second, push with your arms and drive your hips backwards until your hips are sitting on your heels, or as close as you can get anyway. And third, make sure the motion is coming from your shoulders rather than your hips. This drill is basically a physiological trick to get your body to move into a position of deep flexion without activating your hip flexors. If you get on all fours and simply start shifting backwards, then it's pretty likely you're going to engage your flexors to do so. So by focusing on pushing forward with your shoulders, you're using different muscles to produce the movement, and that will allow you to achieve the position without activating your flexors. This will also teach your body that your hip flexors don't need to be firing as hard as possible in order to achieve this position at your hips. So now you have it. If you want to do your leg workouts properly, you want to make sure that you're mobilized. It only takes a couple minutes to do it, and you want to make sure that you're working on the right movements. These are the things that you want to start doing. These are the same exercises that athletes do. And you know what they say, if you want to look like an athlete, you have to train like one. When you start doing these exercises and seeing the results, you can start training your body better and faster because you're training your body the way it was meant to be trained. Thanks for watching Hip Mobility Exercises with Katelyn Inspires Personal Training. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to my channel.